Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here for the third day of Bibliotopia, which this weekend is about madness and mental health. And today we are going to discuss the ghosts of the psyche. That's our topic of today. And our two authors today have written truly haunted novels. Their writing is very powerful, and through their characters, they draw the portrait of one character in particular who's haunted by ghosts straight out of their past. Najwa Barakat, thank you very much for being here. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us. You are from Lebanon. You've written 8 novels, 7 in Arabic, 1 in French. And this novel, Mr. N, was published 3-4 years ago in France. It was published by Actes Sud. It's the story of a writer. Mr. N is a writer who no longer writes, a lonely old man who lives in a room, a place that isn't specified. We know it's in Beirut. We get the feeling, we get to understand that it's a hotel. Progressively, we realize it's not really a hotel, but a psychiatric hospital. He was born in Beirut, and you describe the city in a very striking way. We understand that Mr. N is part and parcel of the city, a little bit like Leopold Bloom, or rather Bloom, with Dublin in Ulysses by James Joyce. Well, it's a little bit the same with Mr. N, who is part and parcel of Beirut, its history, because his grandfather was born in Lebanon and in Beirut. So he walks through the city, but fleeing his demons and in search of the city that he once knew. Antoine Wauters, thanks for being here too. At first, it seems as though you have nothing to do with Najwa Barakat. You're from Belgium. You've published 10 novels, 3 poetry collections. Mahmoud de la montée des eaux earned you the Prix Inter and Prix Wepler. We're here to talk about Haute-Folie, which was published by Gallimard in 2025, for which you received the Giono Prize. I wanted to highlight this because your writing in this particular novel, amongst others, is very close to that of Jean Giono. Haute-Folie is the name of a place, a farm, which will bring your characters close to madness. If I may say so, it's a novel about squalor, poor choices, bad encounters. At the center of the novel, a character, Joseph, but we don't get to know him at first. We discover the story of his parents and then his forebears. So it's the story of a family, a haunted family. Haunted by bad luck, despair. We'll explore all of this. Joseph is a giant. He's affected by illness he doesn't know. I mentioned Jean Giono. I could also mention Pierre Michon. Because of your poetic prose, it's deeply sensual. Your novel reads like a fable or a parable. There's also a sacred and moral dimension to your text. Now, you both come from completely different universes, and yet your two characters are strikingly close, both Joseph and Mr. N, who have to face some sort of inner collapse. And they're ghosts, family ghosts, historical ghosts. Now, Najwa Barakat, first question to you. Like Mr. N, for a long time you'd quit writing and you resumed writing with Mr. N. Isn't that right? Well, Good morning, everybody. I'd say that I started writing fairly early on. My first novel, I read it when I was maybe 23 or 24. At that stage, I'd left Lebanon. It was during the Civil War. I'd left for Paris to continue my studying. As I was in Paris, I started writing. It overcame me just like a wave, I'd say. I wrote about a young girl who was living in a city without any electricity and where everybody has to buy a generator to have access to electricity. These machines are very loud, and this young girl has the impression that they're monsters overtaking the city at night. From that novel and in my next novels, I was obsessed by one single question without having really realized it. It's the issue of violence, not just violence, but cruelty. That normal people, fathers, students, could stumble into from one day to the next. They can become militias, killers overnight. When the war broke out, I was still a teenager. I was going to high school. And faced with this, my only outlet was writing. Faced with this demons, civil war between brothers, an extremely violent war, that's the only reaction. And in this particular instance, the civil war spilled over to neighboring countries, Iraq, Syria, etc. I'd written several novels about the executioner rather than the victim. And I had the feeling that I'd gotten to the end of the road. I'd done this, and I had to think of another type of writing. I didn't know what I wanted to write about. I didn't really know what I wanted to say. But things worsened. The war didn't stop. The situation deteriorated, and as I said, it extended to Palestine, Iraq, with the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. And I was caught by this reality. I was sucked in by this reality that I felt I had already described, but in my novels I described it from another point of view. And then I also felt that literature had become completely powerless in the face of the horror that it couldn't describe. It was shallow. I escaped death several times, come close to death on several occasions, and something snapped in my mind. And I had a hard time writing. I didn't have writer's block, but I had a hard time determining how I could tell what I was experiencing. Could language bear what I had inside? What was literature worth when you're overwhelmed by reality? It's like a tsunami. It raised a whole slew of questions in my mind. I think it happens to everybody when you're faced with a tragedy. Antoine Wauters I think it took a long time for you to come up with Haute-Folie. Yes, absolutely. But I first want to say that I entirely agree with what Najwa has just said. In our world, you've seen death from close up. You've lived in Lebanon. And it's sometimes hard to devote a lot of time to literature. Literature brings many things, but also takes a lot. You see violence. We're all numbed by the violence we're faced with. Writing is an act of resistance. And sometimes when you look at the scales, two plates in the scales, it's pointless. So I understand that at one point in time, and I think it was 15 years in your case, you decide to stop writing. It's the same thing with me, although at a different level. Literature has taken up a huge chunk of my life. It's through the character of Joseph. Joseph is someone who withdraws, who, in a world of silence, sometimes I'm tempted by this. I hesitate between verbalizing through my writing and not saying anything. I'm exhausted, fatigued. It took me 15 years, approximately 15 years to write Haute-Folie. It's not necessarily because of that, but it was hard to find the form, the substance, the sound, the musicality of the text. All of this has to go hand in hand. And it was extremely difficult for me to find the right form. It's text that's short, and it's sometimes hard to write things concisely, paradoxically. So there was also this difficulty. And then one last thing I'd like to finish with. Writing is a medium. It's a magical medium. My book is about family secrets, things that have been silenced in a family. And during the 15 years that it took me to write this book, I realized that I could put my finger on secrets in my own family, and this text has given me the opportunity to understand it because it was corroborated by what relatives told me. The fact that Joseph ends up being an orphan early on, he is taken care of by his uncle and aunt, and it happened in my family. They were swindled by a farmer. That happens in my book, and that also happened to my family. Writers lie, they lie all the time, but in this particular case, this is not a lie. This is an episode that I discovered, and it had been silenced by my family. And writing gave me the opportunity to discover this. Now, to continue along these lines, how do you write in a city, in a country that's torn by a civil war? Mr. N walks around the city and encounters the ghosts of the criminals that he met in life. I'll let you read an excerpt from Mr. N. He speaks about his disgust with writing. Unable to swallow a single letter more, he turned away from his meal like a dyspeptic. Instead of taking up a diet of not writing, a period of light relaxation during which he felt neither hunger nor indigestion. This new regiment was soothing at first, and he thought it would be temporary, like any diet. But months passed, followed by years, and he luxuriated in his withdrawal and isolation. Soon, whenever someone spoke a sentence in his hearing, he found himself picking apart their words as they rose and fell, turned and spun, examining them until the continuity of their thought was severed and whatever remained quickly evaporated. Then, on the rare occasion that he picked up something to read, he discovered that the letters would separate from each other to make space for swarming, ugly little intruders that robbed the words of their meaning. He found it more and more difficult to get his eyes to travel from the first letter to the last in words that seemed to distend as he read like pale, flabby bodies whose heads can't be told from their asses. In the end, he was certain that speech itself had lost its shape. It had deteriorated, worn out, to melt over his hands like candle wax, where it began to burn and caused mere physical pain. There was nothing in the world so infuriating as the words a man couldn't help but read, hear, stammer, and repeat. It became his sole object of complaint. Mr. N decided he hated writing. Maybe the time would come when he was ready to pick up his pencil again, but that time was slow in coming. He would give up all thought of being a writer at least for a while. Then that tyrannical high-rise, that tower sprouted up. It kept rising until he fell as though its bulk was somehow crushing his chest. He left his balcony in his apartment and checked into the hotel. This was years ago now, but Miss Zahra never grew weary of reminding him about his writing, insisting that he get back to work. Writing will relax you, she once told him. Then, taking hold of his hand, she added, your gifts are a blessing. Mr. N just laughed. If it were up to me, I'd share out this gift, as you call it, with everyone, he said. Why shouldn't anyone who likes the idea enjoy this coveted little hell? It was clear that she didn't understand, and how could he explain to her that his body, separated from writing for so long, had become a smooth, orderly landscape after having been a mountain pocked with rocky slopes and caves.
Alors, on peut imaginer que vous mettez un peu de vous-même.
So it sounds like you've put a bit of yourself into that text. Yes, this is really my lived experience. Mr. N is not me, but in the part of in as much as it's a writer who he's a writer who feels like writing in that part of the world is a curse rather than a blessing. He suffered from the powerlessness of words and the inability to describe what is happening outside. And this decision to retreat into silence and leave his home and go live in a hotel, which we're going to discover later is actually a mental institution. Mr. N, who does not want to give his given name, tell us his given name, continues to shrink and use very few words. He's actually physically disgusted by words, by the idea of speaking, repeating. It makes him feel nauseous. And he decides to stop talking. There's a lady who works in the hotel and who takes good care of him, and she's always trying to get him to talk because the doctor has told Ms. Zahra, this nurse, you have to try to get him to start writing again because it will do him a world of good. And the novel begins with Mr. N scribbling on paper, and he talks about Lazarus being brought back from the dead by Jesus. And he says, Lord, what have I done to you? Why are you bringing me back to life? I was happy in a calm, quiet place. What have I done to make you bring me back to life? And this is what is happening to Mr. N, who, from the first sentence of the novel, is scribbling things down, and little by little is going to come back to writing, but mainly towards his past. And he's going to describe the day where his toilet broke down, and he has an Armenian neighbor, and he asks him, "Do you know where I can find this part that I need to repair the toilet?" And he said, "Go to Boucht Hamoud." Boucht Hamoud is a neighborhood in Beirut, a very working-class neighborhood. In that neighborhood, before 2019, all the damned of the earth ended up there. Immigrants, foreign workers, Nepalese, people from nearly everywhere in the world ended up in this neighborhood. In this part of the city, the Armenians arrived after the events in the genocide in 1915. Then the Palestinians flooded in, and the Lebanese who left their villages, who came to settle around Beirut. And Mr. N, who lives in a more upper-class neighborhood, had never been in this neighborhood before. But as he wanders in the small streets, he sees a man, and he says, "I know this man." He approaches, and all of a sudden his heart starts beating very fast, and he discovers one of the characters in a novel that he had written 20 years earlier, and that he had killed off because this character was a torturer. And 20 years later, this gentleman who'd gone bald and developed a belly, a protuberant belly, comes back to haunt him. And Mr. N sees him here and there, tries to follow him, chase him, and this is when Mr. N tips from reality into the other to the other side. Yes, it's fascinating to see how you deal with the relationship between the imaginary and the real. Antoine.
Il y a au départ de votre livre un crime originel.
At the beginning of your book, there's an original crime. You've already talked about it. In Haute-Folie, this farm that was so promising with a young couple managing it is going to be taken away from them, stolen from them in a way. Yet, at the opening of the festival, the murder of Abel was mentioned. Does this mean, if we make the connection, that this family is going to be determined by this event? Yes, I think so. In a certain sense, it's not the only factor. But I think being born into a poor family, growing up in a poor family, a family that's been swindled out of their land, is very difficult. And I think that for the father, Joseph's father, who's called Gaspard, he's the breadwinner of the family. His farm burns. They have no insurance, so they lose everything. And then there's a whole series of plagues that descend on the family. And he has a profound sense of injustice. And Gaspard starts to become mad as well. He's trying to keep going, trying to provide for his family, trying to keep his head above water, but he's slipping. And this is something that we see in many of families and in many novels. I think that the reason I was interested in writing this and feeling what Gaspard was going through was because I'm interested in how an original injustice can affect us. This is something that has unfortunately been transmitted through the generations in my family. A brain that has a glitch and goes off the rails. This is something that I'm familiar with. And I think that I write because I feel this violence in me, the violence of a family that's been swindled. I mean, and I think it keeps me from being violent. I think it makes me, it has tamed my character. I've been writing for about 20 years nearly every day, and it's done me a lot of good. One of my grandfathers was a source of inspiration for Gaspard, and an uncle told me the son of this grandfather told me that when our grandfather was a child, they had lost their farm in similar circumstances as those I write in the novel. And he was in a boarding school, in a school about 15 kilometers from the farm, and he had to walk through the woods, and he was a very anxious child. He and his brother, would go to the school and come home once a week. He would walk barefoot, and he would put his boots on his hands because he thought, if we're attacked, I can use my shoes as weapons. These are little details. In fact, they don't even appear in my book, but details that show you how already in early childhood a brain can crack. I know that these little cracks are within me day in and day out, and I know that things that are said can kill us slowly. I think that sometimes writing a novel enables, maybe not the person who writes it, but his or her family or people who read it, to come out on the other end in better condition, because the weight of silence and secrets is terrible. In the book I say, madness is the country of secrets that have nowhere to go. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just looking at this from a human perspective, maybe a flawed human perspective. But I think that madness is the country of everything that we're not able to express. And so that's the theme I'm working on in this book. I suggest that you do a reading from your book. Yes, I'll try, says Antoine, but my eyesight is not good. I can lend you my glasses, says Oriane. I really have to break down and buy some glasses. Try mine. A writer who can't see, that's... These are like magnifying glasses. Well, yes, that's what happens when you get older. Yeah, you'll have to give me the name of your optometrist. This is incredible. I haven't been able to see so well for ages.
Pour les malvoyants. Par contre, de loin, je ne vois plus rien. Que fait-on quand on a échappé à la mort? Que fait-on quand une guerre s'achève? On débouche les bouteilles qu'on a planquées, on plume les poules que le démon nous a laissées et on prépare d'exquises brochettes que l'on parfume au thym et à la sauge et que l'on rôtit à la broche. On décore de couronnes de fleurs la salle du village. On invite des accordéonistes et des cracheurs de feu et on danse à s'en arracher les jambes. C'est ce que j'aurais fait si j'avais été lui. Je serais resté sur place, toujours et à jamais. J'aurais construit un temple en l'honneur du stoïcisme d'Anna face aux démons et un autre au nom de mon amour pour Fermine. Je me serais efforcé de les aimer, et non seulement de les aimer, mais de le leur prouver. Lui, non. C'est un fantôme que hantent d'autres fantômes, quelqu'un qui ne peut s'établir nulle part, même là où il est bien. Toute sa vie, il va fuir, partir, marcher. On ne guérit pas de certains manques, on part parce que la brûlure est trop vive, on se met en marche parce qu'on espère rejoindre ce qui est impossible à rejoindre. J'ai souvent pensé qu'à négliger les moments de vie auprès des nôtres, qu'à leur tourner le dos, qu'à refuser les joies menues qui s'offrent à nous, on finit par passer à côté de soi. J'ai mis du temps avant de comprendre qu'on ne décide pas ou très peu. Ce que je veux dire, c'est que s'il avait pu choisir, Joseph aurait certainement fait autre chose au lendemain de la guerre. Mais l'histoire d'une famille est l'histoire de motifs qui reviennent au fil des âges, à l'identique ou presque, même failles, même pertes, mêmes amours, même stupeurs. On ne fait que repasser par les mêmes points. Tout a lieu dans des corps différents, mais l'histoire se rejoue, c'est la même. Le passé est une chose longue et lente à guérir. On le croit derrière nous alors qu'il est devant, qu'il nous mène et nous guide. C'est un cercle, une boucle. J'ai mis longtemps avant de comprendre que certains de mes choix n'avaient pas été des choix, mais des nécessités. Et de la même manière que certains choix de Joseph étaient de simples moments de cette boucle. Quand il part au lendemain de la guerre, c'est le passé qui le commande, c'est le vieil incendie qui continue de le brûler, c'est la peine qui lui prend la main. Suis-moi, Joseph, ceci est le chemin.
Merci.
Voilà.
Alors, tout a lieu dans des corps différents, mais l'histoire
All of this takes place in different bodies, but history repeats itself. This is something that Mr. N might say as well, because he is also haunted by the ghost of his father.
Il n'y en a plus de lunettes, plus de micro.
No, we've lost everything. No glasses, no microphone.
C'est-à-dire en dehors de ce qui l'entoure,
Well,
Monsieur N a eu une enfance.
Apart from his surroundings, Mr. N's childhood was also
Il a eu un frère
unhappy, quite unhappy.
aîné, très beau,
He had an older brother,
très intelligent,
very handsome, very
très
intelligent
normal,
brother,
entre guillemets.
very normal,
Bien
in
dans
inverted
sa
commas, and
Que la
well-adjusted.
maman adorait carrément.
And his mother
Et,
loved this brother.
La mère qui est ensuite tombée enceinte une seconde fois
Then she became
ne
pregnant
voulait
again,
pas d'un garçon, d'un
and
autre
she
garçon,
didn't
elle
want
voulait
a
une
second
fille.
boy. She wanted a
Et
girl.
voilà que Monsieur N arrive.
And
Garçon, moche,
Mr. N
qui ne
is
ressemble
born.
pas du tout à son
A
frère.
boy, not
Et
attractive,
dont la mère,
doesn't
quand
look
elle
like his brother.
reçoit,
And when the
elle
mother,
est
when the child is put on the mother after the
raconte
birth,
ça à son enfant.
she
Non,
and she
non,
tells
non,
him
ça
this
peut pas
afterwards.
être
She
mon
says, "No,
fils.
this can't be my
Regardez,
son.
mon fils, il est tout beau,
Look, my
tout-
son is handsome
tout
and
blanc, tout, etc. Celui-là, il est
light-skinned.
plein de poils.
This
C'est
one
la
is
mouche.
hairy."
Je
And
suis sûre
now,
qu'il y a eu
I'm
un,
sure that there's been a mix-up.
échange de bébés.
I'm sure that he's been
Et,
exchanged with my
La mère
actual son.
étant- L'amour de la mère étant absent, il se rabat
So,
sur son
not having his
père.
mother's
Son
love,
père est un
he
médecin
turns to his father,
qui
who's a
ne
doctor,
plaît pas vraiment à la maman qui vient
who the mother
d'une lignée bourgeoise.
is not really in love with because
C'est un
she feels
médecin
superior
qui
to
est
him.
très
She's a
humaniste, qui traite les
higher
pauvres,
class.
qui va
He's
dans les
a
camps
humanistic
palestiniens,
doctor.
etc.
He spends a lot of time in
La
the
guerre
Palestinian camps
éclate,
treating people. Then the
et
war
le
breaks out.
père qui se,
And the
qui se
father,
retrouve dans un camp palestinien.
who has gone to a Palestinian camp
À un
to
moment donné, il y a une
heal
sorte
people.
de, comment on va dire, d'une attaque d'un
is
autre camp
there
qui vont
when
venir
there's an attack.
tuer,
People
faire une
from
sorte
the
de
camp
carnage dans ce camp-là.
come in and start killing everyone.
Le père est dans un
The father
hôpital de petits-enfants.
is in a children's hospital.
L'infirmière qui est là
The nurse, or a clinic, the nurse
dit au médecin,
says
je
to
vais
the
leur
doctor,
donner, un somnifère aux petits comme ça.
I'm
ils
going to
vont
give
pas
them
crier, et
a,
peut-être que les médecins vont pas les
a sleeping
entendre, et
pill.
peut-être qu'on va
That way they won't scream and
Et au
maybe
fond,
we won't be found out.
Elle lui donne une dose supérieure.
But
parce
she
qu'elle sait que finalement ils vont être massacrés.
Gives them a high dose because she knows they're going to be massacred, and she also takes a high dose of sleeping pills, and when the attackers arrive, they find the doctor alone, and they think that the doctor has killed all the children, so they let him go. But the father, like your father in your book, is not going to survive this event for long. He's mourning one day in his office with Anne, who's sitting in a chair next to him. He's about 7 or 8 years old. The father is completely absorbed in his ideas. The son, Mr. N, loves his father, and he's watching his father, and the father gets up, sets his papers aside, climbs up onto a chair, and throws himself out the window. And Mr. N is thinking back over these moments in his childhood and wonders how far one's tolerance threshold can go. How much pain can one bear? So what does he do? He goes into these poor, seedy neighborhoods where all the immigrants and the workers live. And he comes upon a group of thugs, and he walks into the middle of the group, and he provokes them, and then he gets beaten up. Beaten. So he's a masochist. I don't know if it's masochism. Maybe it is. But the idea is, things are not going very well for me. I'm going to take that to its logical extension and see how much I can stand. And in his mind, he's thinking, maybe this is a way to redeem myself, because these people are poor and in dire straits, and we're responsible for this in a way. So it's a form of redemption for him. And at one point, after having been severely beaten up, there's a Nepalese woman, a servant, who finds him, takes him to her house, and takes care of him. And he's going to fall in love with her. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Yes, of course, because we want people to read the book. But even there, love is not going to save him.
What's interesting, reading your book, is that it's the story of a man, a story of a family, but it's also the story of Lebanon that you're telling us through this. There are the massacres of Sabra and Shatila. And the question is, how is the Lebanese people going to recover with this inside? I'm a little more selfish because I tend to think of this as a writer. After 15 years of silence, during which I did not write at all, that helped me find Mr. N on my way and to say through him what it is to be a writer faced with continuous destruction. It never ends. It gets worse and worse. The killings, the slaughters, massacres, the explosion of the port of Beirut. It never ends. And it happens on a daily basis. And let's say you leave, you sever all ties with your countries, you never want to hear about it again. The information is there. You see that on the news. You can't sever all ties with the world. So my question is, as a writer, writing in this day and age, in 2026, how can I react to this, and how can I translate it in words, through a story, through characters? And that's where the issue of madness is interesting, and that's the reason why I'm here. I can no longer work with normal characters, normal in inverted commas, obviously. Characters who have problems in their daily lives.
Qui s'évanouissent petit à petit dans l'écriture, qui vacillent.
These characters are aware of what happens around them, but they're always borderline. They're on the brink of going mad constantly. Yes, that's very striking with Mr. N. Antoine, your characters are also like that. Najwa spoke about Mr. N and his self-sacrifice. What about Joseph? Well, I think I wrote an autobiography by anticipation, in a sense. We don't have the same starting point, obviously, but it's someone who becomes an orphan very early on. He's raised by his uncle and aunt. There's a secret as to the circumstances of his parents' death, and up to the age of 20, he lives with this secret. There's something present in him, and that's his parents' absence. There's nothing more present in me than the absence, especially the absence of his mother. He's lived with her for several years. He's got a few memories of her, but living with this absence becomes impossible. And one day he asks his aunt to finally tell him the truth. And once that's done, once he hears about the way his parents died, this cuts his life into two halves. The revelation of something that has to do with your own family, with your parents' story, isn't necessarily a relief. It was necessary for Joseph, but it's going to come and fracture him, to crack him. And from then on, everything he'd imagined, he wanted to become a school teacher because he wanted to teach children. He decides to do something completely different. He decides to become a wandering monk, wandering through the countryside. He now pays attention to minute details, which are usually overlooked by most people, that don't make it into novels. I'm thinking about plants, stones, animals, small animals, insects that are used as a setting in literature, but are not given any attention. Joseph has this inner wound, and he tries to be connected to these things that are often forgotten in the world. So yes, it's a form of mysticism. Saint Francis of Assisi comes to my mind. Yes, absolutely. I like these characters in history. I recently wrote a text about Hildegard von Bingen, Saint Thérèse de la Croix, Saint Jean de la Croix. These are people who interest me a lot. During the first evening with Rosa, we spoke about ecstasy. These are things that interest me. And Joseph, he's very tall, he's a giant, and he's fascinating for people who come upon him. He's fascinating but also terrifying because of his appearance. To me, walking and writing, these are similar activities.
dans de longues randonnées, plus elles sont longues.
When you hike, I love hiking, the longer the better. The point is not simply to admire the scenery, but the landscape you walk through corresponds to your inner landscape. There's a dialogue between the outside and the inside, what's visible and what's invisible. And I think when you write, the same thing happens. When I write, I establish a dialogue between silence and speech, between dreams and reality.
Tous les jours, j'aimerais qu'il y ait un portrait de Beckett qui est là-bas. Et c'est le rêve de ne plus parler.
Mr. N, I wake up every morning having dreamt that I'll remain silent, that I'll no longer speak.
Que les spirales de mots qui sont constamment
the spirals of words that are constantly
que cela puisse disparaître pour devenir comme
seeking our attention.
Un paysage monotone.
It's a monotonous but very soothing landscape. To me, writing is addictive. Writing history of literature through the history of addiction would be very interesting to me. If you look at the lives of a certain number of authors, just like with any other addiction,
parce que pour comment on dit, se rendre désintoxiquer d'une
one addiction leads to another, because to get out of an addiction, you need to find another addiction. What's interesting is that your various characters are faced with the same anxiety. At one point, the uncle goes to see a doctor, and I think there's talk of bipolarity. The father commits suicide. The mother commits a crime. And Joseph turns to mysticism. It's the same theme explored in different ways, isn't it, through this family? Yes, to a certain extent. I wonder whether the territory of our writing is infinite or not. We tend to say that we've got infinite imagination, but I'm wondering whether we control this, or whether we just control a tiny piece of this territory. I think my territory is very restricted. I have one territory under my control through my writing where I feel great, because this meets a certain number of needs, but I don't think I could write about many other topics. The issue I deal with through this book, or that's processed through this novel, this is not perchance. Philip Roth says that when a writer is born in a family, the family is doomed, because the writer is there to unearth what the family has always wanted to hide, so that it gives the appearance that everything works perfectly fine. The writer is there to look at what's hidden under the carpet, what's been swept under the carpet. The intentions are good. It's hopeful. The writers have the hope in the long run to lift a curse. And to me, a curse is something that's silenced, that's secret, and writing is maybe turning a curse into something that's bearable. It might not be a blessing, but it's bearable. Najwa, turning to you. Antoine said that a writer has a territory that doesn't choose, but that's always the same. For you, it's probably Beirut. You're intimately connected to this city. Without sounding judgy or critical, I think
en tant qu'écrivain.
there are two ways of being a writer.
Vous avez les écrivains qui effectivement
You've got writers who have very well-defined territories and who may write masterpieces that I love reading with a lot of attention. But there's also a type of writing
qui n'arrivent pas à émerger en tant qu'individu.
by authors who have a hard time emerging as individuals, who are not free as beings and who have a hard time feeling free in their thought. I'm talking about another part of the world. And without being judgy, without saying one is better, one is worse,
Il se trouve que si la chance veut que vous naissiez
if
dans
you're
une
lucky enough
géographie ou
to
un canton ou un n'importe
be
quoi
born
bien défini,
in a well-defined
votre
place,
destinée est scellée à l'avance.
it's
Plus
decisive for your
va
fate.
naître, par exemple, dans un monde qui a fait,
More
c'est-à-dire
so
durant son histoire,
than someone who was born in a place
qui a fait sa rédemption, si on va dire, qui a fait ses révolutions, etc. Le monde
has
arabe,
undergone a
malheureusement,
revolution, has redeemed itself.
est noyé.
The world, unfortunately, is
Dans des
completely
On ne
flooded.
sait pas par où commencer.
We don't know where to
Je veux
start.
dire, je me lève le matin, par
I
exemple,
wake up
moi,
every morning.
je tiens une rubrique hebdomadaire dans
To give you an
un
example,
journal, dans un quotidien. Tous les matins, c'est-à-dire hier,
I
j'ai dû
publish on a weekly basis
préparer
for
mon
a newspaper,
article parce que
and
je dois
yesterday
l'envoyer le dimanche.
I had to work on this article because it has
Chaque
to be
jour,
sent
je dis,
out
j'ai
on
envie
Sunday.
d'écrire, par
And
exemple,
every day I
sur
say to
moi.
myself, I want to write about myself.
Tout de suite, il y a une nouvelle, une
And
info qui tombe, il y a
I
je ne sais pas quoi.
Turn on my computer and I see
Je veux dire, vous êtes tout le temps,
what's
tout
in
le
the
temps,
news.
tout le temps happé par les actualités.
You're
Ce sont
constantly
des actualités
bombarded
terribles.
by
Qui ne peuvent
terrible
pas vous
news,
laisser
horrible
indifférente.
news.
Quand
And
vous
you can't be
entendez qu'une-
indifferent
par exemple, peut-être vous avez vu le
faced
film
with it.
de La Voix de Hind Rajab.
Have you seen the movie The Voice of Indra Hajab? When I think of this movie, it kills me.
Auxquelles on assiste,
There are things
qui
that
ne
you
passent
see
pas. C'est comme des histoires de famille,
that
ça
you
devient
can't just
comme
live
votre
with,
propre
and it's
histoire.
just like your own
C'est-à-dire, ce
family
sont des
story.
personnes- je suis désolée de dire ça,
These
un
are
dimanche
things, and
matin.
I'm sorry I have
C'est
to say
terrible de
so
parler
on a Sunday
de ces
morning.
sujets-là.
It's terrible to have
Mais
to
vous êtes
talk about this.
témoin de
But
quelque
we're
chose
witnesses.
vous ne pouvez
We
pas,
witness
qui ne vous
things
laisse pas indifférent,
that don't
qui
leave you indifferent,
vraiment surpasse tout ce qui est de l'ordre de l'humain.
that go
Et
beyond anything
en tant
that's human.
qu'écrivain, vous avez le devoir au moins de témoigner.
As a writer,
Et vous, au
you
fond de vous-même,
have
comme le dit, et
to
que je le dis encore une fois,
bear
j'ai
witness
envie
to
de
this.
me taire. J'ai envie de vivre ici.
As a
en Suisse,
writer, I
devant
say to
le lac
myself,
Léman.
I want to remain silent. I want to live
J'ai
here
envie
in
d'être,
Switzerland,
d'avoir
right
une
by
vie
Lake
normale,
Geneva.
de
I
lever le
want
matin,
to
de
live a
dire,
normal life, wake up in the morning and
qu'est-ce qu'il
say,
fait,
oh,
etc.,
the weather is
de créer
beautiful,
sous le soleil,
it's
etc.
glorious, I
C'est la
want to bask in the
malédiction de
sun.
la géographie aussi. Donc,
And your
et je crois que
geographic
les écrivains
origin
arabes,
is
ou
also a
comme
curse.
il l'était, par exemple, en
Arabic
Allemagne
language
durant
writers,
la Seconde Guerre, après la
just
Shoah,
like
etc. Il y a des questions qui se
in
posent
Germany after World
parfois,
War II,
et malheureusement, on peut
there
pas
are things that we can't escape from,
Donc,
unfortunately.
moi, en tant qu'individu, je dois,
As an
à un
individual,
moment donné, je dois, comment dire, composer avec moi.
at
en
one
tant
point,
qu'individu,
I have to
avec
do
les
with this
autres,
on an individual basis
avec les problèmes qu'ils vivent. quoi,
and
les
with
tragédies.
others, with the problems and
Mais
tragedies that they
il y a quelque
experience.
chose que vous avez en commun là-dessus dans vos livres.
There's something
c'est
that
cette
you have in
tentative
common
de restitution d'un
that's
esprit
common
fracturé par la guerre.
in
Une
your
psyché
books.
fracturée par la guerre.
Psyche, fragmented by wars. Antoine Wauters, do you want to tell us who the Niemans are
Ah non, je ne dis pas
and
qui
what their
sont.
function is? Well, no, I won't
Non, mais
say
s'ils
who
sont
they
en
are.
En réalité, c'est un conte, donc normalement, je ne suis pas censé le situer ni dans le temps ni dans
tale
l'espace.
that's not
soldats
situated neither
allemands, que c'est la Seconde
in
Guerre
place nor in
mondiale.
time, but you get to understand that these are German soldiers
Mais moi,
during
j'ai
World
des
War II.
impossibilités en écriture, par exemple, je n'aime pas
There are
écrire
things
des
that are
mauvais
impossible for
technologies.
me when I
J'ai
write
parfois
literature.
essayé d'écrire le
I
mot
have a hard
Google dans
time
un livre,
writing
et je dois
technological
immédiatement
words.
l'effacer.
I tried writing
Ça,
Google
c'est-
once in a
c'est parce que
novel,
je
but
suis
I
un
had
écrivain
to
des gens.
delete it immediately.
Ou un ringard, mais je n'aime pas
It might be old-fashioned
le
of
mot de
me,
la technologie,
but
je
I
le trouve pas beau,
hate
parce que j'ai commencé
technological
par
terminology.
la
I find
poésie,
this
et
terminology
les mots de la
ugly.
technologie, je
I
les
started
trouve vraiment
writing
moches, quoi.
poetry, and I
Donc-
find
donc
technological
je les-
words
je les- je les-
ugly.
je les
As simple as
supprime,
that. So I delete them.
Mais je ne sais plus quelle était la question.
But I don't. But
C'est-à-dire
I've-
une psyché.
soldats
I don't remember what your
Comment est-ce que
question
la
was.
guerre va transformer aussi,
Demons,
profondément
psyche,
votre
the war, and the
personnage.
way it changes your character
Donc
very
c'est ça,
profoundly.
L'impossibilité, je pense que c'est pas une coquetterie, mais de ne pas pouvoir
It's not
dire certains mots,
vanity,
ça
but
veut dire quelque chose précisément.
not being
Et
able
je
to
crois que
say or
dans
write
l'état
certain
dans lequel
words
on se trouve
means
quand on écrit, il y
something.
a un état d'enfance.
In the state you're in when you
Il y a la
write,
nuit de l'enfance. C'est quelque
you're like a
chose qui est
child.
proche de l'effroi parfois. Et mon enfance, qui était donc
My
une enfance vraiment
childhood,
presque mormone, quoi, coupée du monde.
during my childhood, I was cut from the rest of the world. We had very little access to technology, just like Mormons in a sense.
Les
When
Allemands n'étaient jamais nommés. Ou ils étaient nommés
people
avec
told
des
us about the
espèces
war,
de,
they
comment, de
wouldn't
noms où c'était les Boches, c'était les
mention
Schleux,
the
c'était
Germans. They would use all
et
sorts
mon
of
grand-père qui était, comme
words or
Joseph,
metaphors
un immense
to
taiseux,
describe
qui a
the
d'ailleurs terminé
Germans.
sa vie
My
en arrêtant de
grandfather was
parler.
just like
Il s'est
Joseph.
couché un soir,
He was a man
il est
of
resté 2
very few
mois,
words.
allongé dans son lit, sans se
When
nourrir et sans
just
parler.
before
J'ai toujours vu
he
ça comme
died,
une
he
sorte
spent
d'acte
2 months without eating and
recherche
without
de
uttering a
rédemption,
single word.
Et donc,
And I think for him it was
quand
an
ce
attempt at
type
redemption.
extrêmement taciturne,
And when this guy
acceptait de parler, il se transformait en
chose
auteur exceptionnel.
to speak,
cette
he
longue
told
nuit
extraordinary
de l'enfance
tales.
où j'ai été très heureux, mais aussi très
And this
effrayé.
childhood
Elle est en partie liée
during
à
which
ces
I was
récits
extremely
que me faisait
happy,
mon
but also
grand-père
terrified.
de
This
la
is
Seconde Guerre mondiale.
linked
Et
to what my grandfather told me about World War II.
crée des images en moi
It imprinted images in my
qui ne
mind
s'effaceront jamais,
that
et au
I'll
départ
never be
desquelles
able
très
to get
souvent
rid of.
je m'aperçois que l'écriture
And very often,
ça procède de ça.
I realize that writing comes from there. That's where my writing stems from. I haven't experienced the war myself, but isn't the war an experience that's transmitted in this way? I'm thinking of Peter Handke, Fritz Zorn. They talk about the silent wars that are experienced within families, a child who's been abused by his parents, who can't say it. These traumas are imprinted in families. In biology, there are families of trees, and I think it's the same thing with us. I'm still haunted by some things, by my grandfather. I identify with him in a sense. It might be a mistake, but I wonder how, if he hasn't haunted me, and I'm still trying to imitate what he did, just like Wittgenstein, who at the end of his life hid in a hut in the woods and stopped writing. I'm tempted by this. It might be the most beautiful things when one writes. In literature, maybe the thing that you try to do when you write, when you read a book, is the silence in the words. That's what I try to do through my poetry. It may be strange to use words as an instrument to reach silence. Well, words have damaged me, but they've made me extremely happy with an intensity that I haven't found elsewhere. That's the reason why my relationship to writing is very ambiguous. It's very paradoxical. But this is something that I really like, so I may still have, I don't know, 3-4 novels in me.
Est-ce que vous
We'll
avez des questions
talk about that again in a few years. Turning to the audience now, do you have any questions for one of our authors?
No.
Madam? No, we have time.
Merci. Donc j'ai une question pour vous, madame.
I have a question for you, madam.
Après 15 ans sans écrire,
After a 15-year hiatus, you published your first novel in French. Is that another way of keeping things at a distance? I wish I could answer that. But the book was written in Arabic, primarily in Arabic. There's Mr. N, and then there's a very old, the absence of May, and my books have been translated into French and English. But you did write one book in French. Yes, I did. So you're not totally wrong. That was when I was living in Paris, where I lived for about 20 years, and I was initially went to Paris to study cinema, and the war dragged on, and I stayed in Paris. My suitcases were always ready, but the war kept me from going back. Anyway, I wrote a novel called The Tenant. In French, it's Pot de Fer, and that's the name of a street in a neighborhood in Paris where I lived for a very long time. And I wanted to write the book in Arabic, but it didn't work. The book starts with a parenthesis, and the parenthesis is closed at the end of the book. Because the book talks about a woman, who's actually me, who decides overnight to not leave her flat. She never wants to go out again into the city. And she's connected to the world through the telephone, email, and her intercom. When Jehovah's Witnesses come and ring her doorbell, she talks to them on the intercom. She has lots of friends who have left Lebanon and who are in the US or all over. And when I tried to write about the Latin Quarter, etc., it just didn't work in Arabic. So choosing to write in one language or another is a very serious and difficult question. So I issued a book in French, I would put it that way. And any other questions?
Non, eh bien alors écoutez, merci beaucoup.
If not, let me thank both of you.
Je crois que vous allez signer vos livres.
You're going to be signing your books upstairs, and thank you very much again.
Merci.